Welcome to the European Parliament in Brussels. We're here to discuss the new book, A Bridge Too Far, Turkey in the European Union, by Philip Claeys and Koen Dillen, both members of the European Parliament for the Vlaams Belang, the Flemish Interest Party. The Vlaams Belang opposes Turkish EU membership. Mr. Claeys and Mr. Dillen have written a book to argue the case against it. Mr. Dillen, let me ask you up front, why was this book published?
Well, as you know, 3 years ago, Brussels and Ankara started official negotiations which would lead to the admission of Turkey as an official EU member state. And as it was the case with the so-called Constitution and later the Lisbon Treaty, we saw that the main political parties tried to avoid and even to forbid a public discussion on this important matter for our European future, because all these parties are well aware that a vast political majority in the European countries is against the admission of a huge Islamic state in the European Union. And that's why we decided to write this book that covers all the aspects of the admission of Turkey as EU member states. And inside the European Parliament, the Vlaams Belang is one of the most important forces opposing the admission of Turkey as an EU member state. And you know, next year we have European elections in June, and we thought it very important to translate this book into English, because there are very rare publications in the English language on this important matter. So we think we fill the gap, and let's hope that the debate will rise now.
Mr. Claeys, could you explain why the Vlaams Belang opposes the entry of Turkey to the European Union?
Well, if Turkey would be allowed to join the European Union, it would mean that the biggest member state of the European Union would not even be a European country. Turkey is not a European country, and that's not just an opinion of ours, but it's a mere historical, geographical and cultural fact. And we think that the European Union should remain a European project. Moreover, Turkey doesn't meet the political conditions in order to join the European Union. It has a very negative human rights record. Economically and socially speaking, it will not be possible to integrate Turkey within the European Union. It doesn't have a social security system, for instance, like we have in Europe. And if Turkey would be allowed to join the EU, every Turk will be entitled to settle anywhere in the European Union, which would mean a massive new immigration wave into Europe, which we don't need.
Mr. Dillen, the book was presented in Washington on the 22nd of November. It seems, however, that the Turkish candidacy has a lot of support in the Anglo-Saxon countries. The Bush administration, for example, has explicitly supported it.
Yes, that's true. For geopolitical reasons, Washington and the United States have always been a very strong advocate and partisan of Turkish admission, especially since the NATO summit in 2004 in the famous press conference of George Bush. This is for geopolitical reasons that have nothing to do with our own interests. And ironically, we see in Europe that left-wing parties agreed with Bush on this matter, but for other reasons. First of all, they dream of this dogmatic multicultural society, and they need mass immigration to sustain itself as a political factor in Europe. Let's say in Germany, for instance, you have these 2.5 million Turkish voters, and they all vote for left-wing parties. So it is also out of self-interest that these parties are in favor of admission of Turkey into the European Union. But sadly enough, we also see that there are some soundly Eurosceptical parties in favor of Turkey's admission, because they say that the admission of Turkey would lead to the implosion of the European Union. We think, and we discuss this in our book, that this is a very perverse argument. So let's hope again that this book will rise the discussion.
Mr. Claeys, Take Theodorakopoulos, writes the High Life column for The Spectator, wrote in his foreword to your book, and I quote, inviting Turkey to become part of the European Union is the equivalent of a man recently married to a beautiful young bride, inviting Don Giovanni to be his house guest during the honeymoon. The concept is more than stupid, it is suicidal. End quote. Any final thoughts you'd like to share with our viewers?
Well, of course, I agree with Taki, but you should know this book is not against Turkey in itself. It's not against the Turkish people. We think Turkey is and should remain an important ally and a friendly ally of the European Union, but it's much more realistic to strive for a relation of a privileged partnership than to allow Turkey as a fully fledged member of the European Union, which would not work. And it's very important that this issue is discussed because the majority, and the big majority of the Europeans are against Turkey joining the European Union, but the European Commission, the European Parliament, the European Council are all in favor of it, but don't have any real arguments to do this.
Gentlemen, thank you for this interview.